All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. Welcome to another candidate conversation with Vote ATL. We are so excited. My name is Rohit. I'm with the Center for Civic Innovation. We got our team in the house. We got another candidate for Post 3 at Large. For those of you who do not know, while we are all talking about the presidential race and elections that are happening around the country, there's also an election happening right here in our city of Atlanta. The city of Atlanta is going to be voting for a city council seat for Post 3 at Large. The city council is made up of 15 folks. 3 of those seats are at-large positions, which means that they serve every neighborhood across the city. And so one of those positions became vacant just this past year because the candidate who was, the person who was holding that office decided to run for something else and did not decide to seek re-election. So we have 5 people who are vying to be the next city council member. Now, also a thing to keep in mind is whoever is elected will still have to run again next year. So next year there is the municipal election where we will have election for mayor, we will have election for city council members, and also for half of the school board, just to name a few. So Atlanta and elections, never a dull moment. It's always election season in Atlanta. We are really lucky to be joined today by Dr. Nikki. We're going to have a robust conversation. Just to give you a sense of the format, Dr. Nikki and I will have a conversation for just a little bit. If you have questions that come up, throw them in the chat, throw them online. We will ask them. We'll ask them questions for folks who are here in person as well. And then we will rock and roll. And you can watch the entire thing on YouTube at youtube.com/@CivicAtlanta. So I think that's the whole spiel. I think I made it through, which is good. Yes, great, amazing. Thank you. I know you should see it in here. People are going crazy over it. It's great. It's wild over here. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. We know that this is it is election season, and that is never a dull moment at all. But we're gonna have an opportunity to get into a whole bunch of things today, and we'll definitely talk about your vision and this particular role and why you're running and what you've done. But we'll get to that. Yeah. But before we get to any of that, I want to start with the same question that we have started with everybody, which is why? Why public service for you? Where does that come from for you, and why is that so important to who you are as a person?
Yeah, great question. But before that, I want to thank you for having me. Thank you for this forum and this opportunity for what you all do in the community. I read up a little bit about you all, so I'm excited to be here. A bit about me and why civic responsibility. I grew up around people giving and giving back all of my life. I think one of my role models that I adore the most is my grandfather. On my father's side, he was a Pullman porter. He was a deacon at Liberty Baptist Church, right around the corner from here. But most importantly, he was a fixer-upper guy. You know, he had a truck. I remember my neighbors, when he'd drive up in the driveway, I had a neighbor who would go, da 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 da, like Fred Sanford. My mother was an educator, and her bonding at that point in the 70s, he was giving Black people the opportunity to own homes, and he took a lot of pride in that. And he would, back in that day, it wasn't online, he would put them in the car and they would ride to homes. And inevitably, he'd stop by our house for them to meet his family. So they became family. He knew he was creating generational wealth and giving them that American dream, if you will. So it was just always all around me, and I was destined to take this route.
Yeah, for you, do you have any siblings?
I do. I have an older brother. He's 4 years older than me.
Okay.
So my mom she worked for quote unquote the government as an educator, right? My dad was really an entrepreneur back then, because he was a realtor. And so I just remember my mom always saying, get you a job where you get a check on the 1st and the 15th. Because it was sometimes feast or famine in the real estate, right?
Yeah.
And so my dad would have some great months, and then some days I'd be like, Dad, don't walk in here, right? So my brother went into government as well. He was a Secret Service agent he retired from the Secret Service, and then he was a U.S. inspector with the Department of the Interior, retired from that one as well, and then now he works in private industry over worldwide fraud for Fortune 500 companies. Yeah.
How would your brother describe you as a kid?
Tall.
Okay. Got it.
I was always tall. I was
Great.
4 years younger, but
I'm sure
tall.
he loves that.
So first he would say tall, he would say outgoing. Even though I am outgoing, I'm relatively shy. But to him, I was outgoing, everyone knew me. I made good grades. He was always very proud to say that I was his little sister. So I think he would say, mostly positive things.
Okay.
Or at least that's all I'm saying right now.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Where did you grow up?
Southwest Atlanta.
Okay, whereabouts?
Yeah, so I went to Benjamin Mays High School. So right off of Benjamin Mays Drive. It was Sewell Road when I grew up. And actually, my parents still live in the house that they brought me home to 57 years ago, and they've been married like 64 years or so.
Okay.
They're 85 and 87, so they're part of the inspiration for running as they try to age in place gracefully.
Yep.
But yeah, so that's where I grew up. I went to Atlanta Public Schools.
Okay.
Pre-K through 12th grade. My mother taught at the school where I first started out in pre-K, EA Ware. It's not there anymore, but it's on Morris Brown's campus across from the Mercedes-Benz. It's still there. I think it's a YMCA now.
Okay.
And then I went to Walter F. White Elementary School in Dixie Hills.
Okay.
At that time, it was kindergarten through 7th grade.
Okay.
And then I went to Southwest High School for 2 years.
You act like you went to school back in the day. Like as if you're it wasn't that long ago, right?
Well, I know,
but Atlanta's changed so much.
and so quickly. And so when I'm explaining things, I don't know when it's gonna register for the person that I'm talking to. Right? Sometimes they're like, oh, okay, I know what that is. I know what that is.
Gotcha.
I went to Young Middle School. It was Southwest High School at the time. I went there for 2 years. Then they built Mays High School, so we finished up at Mays High School. Yes.
Did you know at a young age, were you like, I'm going to be a teacher, I'm going to follow in my mother's footsteps, or were you thinking you were going to be a little more entrepreneurial like your dad?
Yeah, so right around maybe 82 or 83, getting a lot of information from People magazine. Okay. And there was communication around young black boys caught up in the juvenile justice system. Okay. And I just remember thinking then, I want to do something about that. That public education, prison to pipeline, that prison, school to prison pipeline. And so that became very important to me.
Why? What was it about reading about that in the 80s that resonated?
Probably my brother.
Okay.
You know what my brother used to say, of course you got good grades, you're a girl. And he used to say, but mom, the teacher won't listen, or that sort of thing. So very early on, I was watching for equity and fairness and understanding and patterns of responses to behaviors. Yeah. And so I think it was probably a little bit of my brother. And so when I read this article, I just remember thinking, and I had one teacher tell me about 9th grade, I wrote an essay and had to present it, and he was like, you're so great, you should go into law, because I initially thought that was the pathway. Okay. But yeah, I just knew public service. but it was focused around kids. And at that point, it was young Black boys in particular.
Okay, and you think that had to do with your brother?
Probably,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
probably.
And so when you were, what would you say, based on where you grew up in Atlanta, what are some of the biggest changes you saw early on? Could you imagine Atlanta would be kind of where it is today, like what it looks like today, and what are some of the biggest changes that you've seen?
Yeah, no, I don't think I could have imagined. I knew it was a safe space for me and my family and my friends.
What made it feel safe for you?
I felt seen and heard. I felt like there were people investing in my best interest.
Yeah.
Even when they were holding me accountable, and that's why I say this all the time, accountability is love. If people don't care about you, they'll let you just do whatever. And I felt like right in my neighborhood, in my family, even at my schools, people were vested. So I knew it felt good. Even when I went away to college, I sort of felt like, I had a edge up on others because I just felt so comfortable in my skin, and I knew it was up to me to make it what I wanted it to be.
Yeah.
And to take charge, and all the people that had poured into me, I owed it to them to show up as my best self.
What do you get in trouble for the most as a kid?
I didn't get in a whole lot of trouble. You know what they say about educators? They had a good experience in school. So most of us, probably talking.
Okay.
I was easily distracted.
Okay.
Hence the pen and paper, so I can take notes. I am hypersensitive to behaviors.
Yeah.
And so, I may be enjoying what's happening, but I hear someone huff and I'm like, why are you huffing?
Yeah.
Like, this is good stuff, So it was probably a little bit of like that, pay attention.
Yeah.
You can do so much better if she focuses.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we're doing this interview on Edgewood Avenue then. Nothing distracting happening here.
Right.
That's fair. So for you, when you said you didn't know exactly how you wanted to do public service, but you knew that was in you. What was your views on teaching? Was that something that when did you decide teaching would be an interesting pathway for you?
So I took a unique pathway to education. If I can go back just a little bit, when I finished college, I was working and living in Old Town Alexandria outside
And where'd you go to
Washington.
college?
Howard University.
Okay, got
Yes.
it. Yep.
And so I was at a dinner party. It was around the Christmas time. And I was sitting and someone asked, an older gentleman, what are your plans next? What are you doing? And so I told him I was studying for the LSAT. I wanted to go to law school and why I wanted to be, a public defender and that sort of thing. And he thought it was admirable, but his face didn't look like it. I told you I watch behaviors. And so I was just kind of like, what's that about? And he said, well, it's admirable, but it's reactive. Have you thought about doing something more proactive, where you give kids those conflict resolution skills, those problem-solving skills? They won't need an attorney. They won't be caught up in the juvenile justice system. That made a lot of sense to me, and then he introduced himself as the chair of the counseling department at Virginia Tech. And so then he said, you should come. And I was like, I'm not going to move to Blacksburg.
Yeah.
He's like, we have a satellite campus in Tyson's Corner. And I literally, this was December, I started in January.
What made you do it? I mean, that
It made
sounds
sense.
weird. No,
It made
it's like,
sense.
yeah.
No, it made sense because it was preventative.
Okay.
And
So that's all it took for you to be like, all right,
100%.
180, I'm going.
listen, if something makes sense to me, I'm going to explore it. Like literally, I didn't sign at the table.
Right.
But I processed what he said.
Okay.
And of course, my mom was in education, and of course, she's always pushed it. Like I said, it's consistent. You're gonna get,
Sure.
you're gonna get your reward, and you can retire. And so, I'm trifecting data.
Yeah.
I've heard this a few times.
Yeah.
And so I started that next semester, and I never looked back. I was living in the DC metropolitan area, and so my parents were like, you should come home, you don't have to pay for rent and your car note and all that. So I ended up transferring to Clark Atlanta University, where I ended up getting that degree and one other degree.
Okay. What made you choose Howard? Why specifically Howard?
Yeah, well, a lot of things. I know or knew how powerful Howard University's reputation was around the world. I had an older cousin that had gone, so I visited once before. And I also knew that I had experienced a wonderful part of Atlanta. I felt that I knew Atlanta, but I felt as a young kid that I needed to go beyond Atlanta, beyond Georgia, beyond the South, and to experience something to round out who I was going to be.
Yeah.
I was always that kid to say to myself, even at a very young age, why am I here? What am I intended to really do? And so that was a logical step for me to go away for a little bit. I always knew I would come back home,
Yeah.
but I wanted to have a global view, international view of the world. And I chose Howard also because it's in the most political city in the world, arguably. I still get chills when I fly in. And when I would walk around Georgetown, my friends would say, oh my gosh, that's Doug Williams, quarterback. And I'm like, that's Robert Mikulski, senior senator from Maryland. And they're like, how do you know that?
Yeah.
But it was just so palpable.
Yeah.
The sense of responsibility and the power and the promise,
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
So, a lot of folks who are running for the seat, claim their Atlanta roots. Like there's what makes someone really rooted in Atlanta? What does that mean to be rooted here? What would you say to someone who would question your Atlanta credibility or your Atlanta accolades? Do you believe that you're rooted enough in this city to be able to speak on its history and why this city matters?
Yeah, I do think that I am. I am a third generation native Atlantan. I have a grandson who is fifth generation native Atlantan. As I said, my parents are here, my grandparents are here. And so, yes, but more importantly, really being truly rooted in Atlanta is that you understand the history and the legacy and the promise of the city. And so, yes, if someone were to give me a test, I would think I would pass. But also, we've had some great leaders like Shirley Franklin, that wasn't from Atlanta, from Philadelphia. So I think you can love the city, you can work hard in the city, you just need to understand the promise, the legacy, the deep, rich history of Atlanta.
Well, what's something about Atlanta that you feel maybe you don't fully understand, that isn't something that, when you think about your roots in the city, yes, you have legacy here, you have family here, but what's something that maybe feels a little more disconnected from
I don't know everybody's paradigm of Atlanta.
Okay.
I know mine.
Okay.
You know what I mean? But through the work that I've done over the last 30 years, I've been able to immerse myself in neighborhoods and learn.
So when you say you don't know everyone's paradigm, what does that mean?
So I grew up middle class in Atlanta, right? That's not everybody's experience.
Right.
It's even more divided now, but it's always been divided, right? I don't know everything. So, because I ask questions and because I listen, and I even have a podcast I've been doing for the last 4 years called Townhouse Talks. I listen from people, and that's just something I do because I'm curious, I'm nosy, but then also I want to grow. And so when they talk about their Atlanta experience, it's different from mine.
Yeah.
But I need to know that because a lot of times you move and you govern and you lead from just your experience.
Yeah.
And we can't have people doing that in roles like this. You have to listen, empathize, find a common understanding, and then sometimes just stop the talking. This is not your experience, and so you need to learn from that. And so I've learned that as a person, as a leader, and I will utilize that.
Who's someone that you've talked to that I think that has given you perspective that you didn't have before? And what was that perspective that you gained?
That's a very good question. Someone who has given me perspective. without giving a name, I will say I have worked in a lot of communities around the city. One community at the time when I started working there and leading there, it housed the lowest performing school in the state of Georgia, lowest income census tract in the state of Georgia, and highest asthma rates in the city. So you're talking economic, educational, and physical barriers to just every day-to-day life. And I remember one time I came to work and one of the parents said to me, "You look like you had a good night's rest. You slept in a bed, didn't you, Dr. Jones?" And that was a perspective that I had never thought about. Not everybody in Atlanta sleeps in a bed. They don't get a good night rest. I'm not getting as many good night rests now that I'm running for office. But that was the perspective. For me, it's not the big people that I interact with. It's the regular people that are along the way that impact how I view things and how I change my purview of things.
How do you operate in a space where you want to be balanced in your perspective, but neutrality doesn't seem to also be the answer? Mm-hmm. So how do you break neutrality and incorporate perspectives that might actually be more important to hear? I'd be curious, what perspectives do you feel are not represented in government today, and in some cases that for many people feels intentional? Mm-hmm. So why are those perspectives not represented, and how would that be different in the way that you would lead?
Trying to store that whole question.
So I'll break it up.
Yeah.
So one is, what perspectives do you feel are not represented in government today that should be?
Yeah, so I think just neighborhood by neighborhood, the community voice.
Okay, when you say the community, who is that?
That is the residents, that's the MPUs, that is the business owners, that is everybody that lives in the community. But I wanted to start with the beginning part of that. What was that you said? You asked me if...
I'm asking which voices are most often excluded or not included in the way that they should be, in the way that we make decisions as a city.
Yeah, and again, I will go back to the community voice.
But I want to push on that to ask, when you say community voice, it can be anybody, right? Mm-hmm. But that's not at the root of the question. The question is, there are voices, I guess maybe let's even take one step further back from there. Would you agree that there are some voices that are heard louder than others, or some perspectives that are not heard as much as they should be?
Yes.
Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, so which perspectives would you say are not as included as they should be, or are in some ways ignored or pushed to the side?
I think it's the less informed. I think it is people who don't know where the meetings are, or how to get information. I think we have to bring information to the neighborhoods and to the people. There is a lot of times where it's just said, I put it out there, it's on the website, we posted it.
So who suffers from that? What would you
everyone.
Okay.
I would say everyone.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's an equity conversation.
But equity would imply, right, aside from equality, right? Like equity would imply that some people are hit harder by something than something else. So who's hit harder?
The ones that have the information last.
Okay.
The people that are not around.
Why are they getting the information last?
Sometimes it's just set up that way, and I heard you say it could be intentional. It could not be intentional, but
You don't believe it's intentional?
oh no, I'm not saying that.
What do you believe?
I believe it's an intentional when you know you're leaving some people out and you keep doing it.
Well, yes, that's the definition of intentional, right?
Yeah,
But do you believe that the city of Atlanta intentionally does not get certain information to certain people?
So that's hard for me to answer, because I would say this. I believe everybody sometimes is doing the best that they can with the information that they have, but that's also why I'm running, so that I can say we have to do multiple ways to get information to people. I mean, I use the analogy as a principal. Yes, I can put it on the website, I can put it on the calendar for the year, I can send a weekly bulletin, I can do the monthly reminder, I can do a flyer, I can do a robocall, still the day before PTA meeting, I stick a sticker on the kid saying PTA is tonight.
So,
you have to try to reach people where they are, and don't just say, I posted it for 10 days, which is the reg, or whatever it is, and then that's enough. It's not.
Yeah, no disagreement there, right?
Yeah.
So, but as you know, as a teacher, there's, but if you're trying to get information and you're looking at the students that you need to get information to, there are some students who are gonna, their parents gonna sign them up immediately, get what they need to, but then there's gonna be some students that aren't able to do that. The understanding of that is rooted in our intent around how we approach equity.
Right.
So what I'm trying to get a sense of is we're in agreement that there are some communities and some residents of Atlanta who do not get information or do not get the same opportunities or access that other people in Atlanta might. And I'm trying to understand why that is the case. Because I think if we understand why that's the case, then we can get into how we solve it.
Right.
But I want to better understand from you, why do you believe that's the case? What is, based on your analysis of the landscape of Atlanta, why is Atlanta so unequal?
And I'm going to go back to literally what I said in terms of, I think people are used to the status quo, and they're used to just doing the very minimum that is expected to get information out if we're talking about this specific subject.
Okay.
And I just named 10 different ways, that I communicated with parents, because I didn't know which one was going to resonate with the parents or really get that touch point.
Sure.
And I think we need to do multiple ways communicating what is happening. I think we need to stop using acronyms. Everybody is not as astute as people who watch a forum like this. And so I think we need to understand that. I understood it when someone said, you look like you slept in a bed.
What do you think they meant? What were they saying?
They just meant.
What's the message behind that?
The message behind that is that life is comfortable, your basic needs are being met, and so then you can come and approach each day rested and ready, and not everyone has a peaceful existence in this city.
Agreed. Why?
Yeah, because people are not doing enough.
What do you mean they're not doing enough? What does that mean?
It just depends on what it is. We're talking affordable housing. We're not doing what we need to do to make affordable homes. And we haven't done it for the last 12 years or so. Now we're trying to catch up. We have low inventory. We've got old zoning laws that we're looking at addressing now. By 2025, we should have some rezoning done. We've got to build up. We've got to stop thinking out. But how you do that, and I remembered what the first part of your first question was, you said neutrality can be a problem, right? And you can't get consensus. And what I'm saying about building relationships is because you gain the trust. So when you do veer from what they want you to say, of course, my background is education. Everybody wants this teacher for 4th grade and this teacher for 5th grade. I can't have 100 in that class, right? So you're gonna disappoint people that sometimes you're gonna come to a crossroad where you're gonna have to say, I've done a lot of research on this, and I want to share with you my understanding of why we're gonna have to agree to disagree, quite possibly. But you are able to do that when you build trust and you have empathy for where someone is coming from. So I listen to what people tell me and what they show me, because it allows me to put myself in their position so I can understand this is not personal. They don't dislike me. This is not an attack on how I live. It is just trying to get them to say, see me, see my plight.
Right, and I think this is going to be the challenge, is that there will be multiple people who will, and in this role, will say, see me, see my plight. And really what people are trying to look for in their leadership or in who they elect is to understand who you are for. And what has happened, right, is you have people who say, well, I'm for everybody. that I want one Atlanta. I want this for everybody who's out here. And for some, that is a good equality argument, but it's not a good equity argument. Because what it implies is that everybody has the same shot to have the same thing.
Correct.
And there's a large number of people, just statistically speaking in Atlanta, that have constantly you've been underinvested in, communities that have been promised things and those things have been taken away. And so I think that a very big part of this role is diagnosing why that exists structurally, politically, in order for us to understand what may happen. Now you said maybe it's some housing policy, that might be a reason why those structural inequalities exist. But what else for you is like if I'm somebody who has felt that about my neighborhood, what would you tell me why that's happening? Why is that happening?
Well, I think there is obviously inequity in education in schools. So that leads to opportunities. I think access to city services, parks, all of those things that make the city work for a lot of people. I think it's jobs. I think it's job training. I think it's workforce development. I think it's early childcare.
These are all solutions.
Yeah.
Why does the problem exist?
It exists.
In a city of such plentiful resources, in a city of such great wealth that exists for part of the city, in a city of abundance.
Yeah.
Why do these structural inequalities exist in the first place?
People have overlooked it. They have just totally overlooked it.
So it's intentional.
It could be intentional, but it also could
To
be...
overlook something is that's usually an intentional act, right?
It
Or were
can
they
be.
blinded by something else?
It can be. Some people get caught up in their lives. Okay, like in the 90s, I think a lot of people were making it for their families. We built all of these neighborhoods with gates.
Sure, but I'm not talking about, I thought when you said people are overlooking it, I thought we were talking about elected officials.
I'm talking about elected officials.
Okay, so.
I'm talking about elected officials, and I'm also talking about people who have power within the city.
So who has power? So tell me that. Who would you say has power?
So I would say elected officials, I would say business people, I would say, upper middle class, I would say people that have the opportunity to do things, but maybe just didn't think about it or maybe intentionally didn't do it.
So as a kid who's living in a neighborhood where either someone intentionally or not intentionally overlooked my needs, right? I'm looking at you as a potential future elected official, and I look at you and I say, so what are you going to be able to do that's going to be any different than anybody else has done? I've been promised everything under the sun. I've been told that there will be opportunities there, but you're not actually addressing the root reason why my challenges may or may not exist. So why should I vote for you? Why should I elect you? What's going to be different? What for you specifically in your leadership is going to be different than what we've seen from other folks who have said the problem, but not necessarily diagnosed it?
Yeah, so I think for me, and what I would do differently is to build the trust, to be in the neighborhoods, to have those relationships, to really hear what is happening.
Okay, so now we build trust. I trust you. So if I trust you, now what are you going to do?
I am going to, having listened to your needs, your desires, and probably seen it, right? In some of the neighborhoods, it's very clear as day. And then advocate for resources to fill those gaps. And I've done that for 30 years, right? And every neighborhood is different. I mean, that's what I'm trying to say. And I believe that some people legislate just thinking, okay, this will work for everybody.
Right.
And it won't.
Right.
It won't. I've seen it firsthand. I can go from one school to the next school and they can be 3 miles apart. Everybody wants their kid to be able to read. But how you get there is very different, and you have to listen to the community. For some community members, I can just shave off about 15 minutes of music and art and PE, get me a 45-minute block to reinforce reading for the kids who are not doing so well. Go to the next neighborhood, I better not touch those arts. And then also, I better infuse 15 minutes of recess every day. So I'm doing less with more, but you get to be more innovative. It's some before school, it's some after school. So I believe that in this role, the way to impact change is, yes, to work with other members on city council, look at cities that have had similar problems for precedents, and then also solutions, but then come back and involve the community. And that's one of my pillars of my platform, which is prioritize citizen engagement, so that we have these conversations so it doesn't feel like it happened to you, it's truly happening with you. And people, and you have to have this relationship and have to have this trust, because I've worked in schools where, like I said, the school may be low performing for years, and then all of a sudden you make change, and it's like, but I like that teacher, I liked that leadership team. They don't want anything to change, but they do want the school to change. And so how you navigate that in a very respectful way, because what they were giving was empathy and sympathy and concern and generational love. The way that you break through that is to build trust with leaders throughout the community. That's the NPU, that's the unofficial leaders.
So you believe that if the community says something and they believe something, they come to you and you build trust with them, that it is your responsibility to make sure that their voice is amplified and heard within policymaking and decision making?
I believe it is amplified and heard, and where we disagree, I built that goodwill so we can have that conversation too.
So let's use an example in Atlanta. So Atlanta has, from when in 2021, when I was doing these interviews with folks who were running for mayor, running for different council seats, there was joint agreement on one thing, which was that the community engagement around building a police training facility in a location in DeKalb, which was a singular location that was identified, old prison farm in DeKalb County. Everyone agreed that the way we did community engagement was completely wrong. Residents were not actually engaged in the process. There was a benevolent donor, in the words of the mayor, who came and said, I want to build this here. Now, the history of this, as you just said, you have to understand the history in order to make good decisions. The history is that this is a historic Black neighborhood around there that was promised a public park. They were told, we're going to build a green space, we're going to build a park. You just talked about the inequality of access to these types of services. They were told there would be a 100-acre park that was there. It's front page of the AJ's, or some report. Foundations were behind it, etc. And then it took one benevolent donor to come in and say, I'm going to push a police training facility to be built here. There's 16, 17 hours of public engagement around there. And the council voted against not pausing that project until there's proper community engagement, and also, in fact, speeding it up. Speeding up the timeline on that process. So one, I want to ask, if you were on council in 2021, would you have voted to lease 85 plus acres of land to the Atlanta Police Foundation to build that police training facility? Where would you have voted if you were on council that day?
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying, obviously I don't have all of the information.
Okay.
And I would say too,
what information do you feel you don't have?
I shouldn't have all the information that council has. I would hope that they.
Well, why not? Because all of it is public info at this point. What information do you feel you still?
I don't know what their constituents said to them. I don't know, in their, maybe not in that neighborhood, but in the neighborhoods that they represent, districts where they represent, so I can't really speak to that.
Okay.
I can say with the limited information that I know and speaking to my constituents, which I'm not in office, so it would be family and friends and that sort of thing, there's less pushback to that facility. There's a belief that training needs to happen, 21st century policing training, also wellness, and we're also talking about the fire, we're talking about EMS, and I
Well, I'm not asking whether there's training or not. I'm asking whether, if there has not been an adequate amount of community engagement and participation, which was agreed, which is, everyone is on record saying that is the case. And you just said how important community engagement and trust is. And then a vote comes in front of you and it says, this is the moment, we're gonna either transfer this land to the police foundation or we're not. Where would you have voted?
Yeah, based on what I know, I would have voted for the public safety training facilities simply because because of my belief about Atlanta. If it's gonna happen, I'd rather it happen here, right? Under the watchful eye of organizations like yours, a city council that is diverse, citizenry that is relatively engaged. I hear what you're saying, and I don't know the process for the engagement. Is that one meeting?
Well, I'm asking you, what should the process be?
No.
You're the person, I am, as a resident, and as someone who would be one of your constituents, I would be curious, what is involved in, what is sufficient community engagement for you?
Yeah.
Because you're saying, yes, I would have voted for it, but we gave the context of, that's even within the context of community engagement being insufficient.
Well, but that's also why I said I don't know all the details of the process of communication, of community engagement that stood when it happened. But what I would say moving forward is that it is a very clear process that involves the neighborhood that is being most impacted, other residents around the city as well, and every NPU, just to get input on where everyone is feeling. I know that there was a call for 17 hours. I guess it was COVID, so it couldn't be in person.
And then there was 16 hours of public comment after that in person.
Right. Okay, that part I did not know about, but I knew the part on the call. But with that said, I would want to put in very clear processes of how we get community involvement. And I hear what you're saying. If all of those were not met, I would not feel comfortable with that.
So why do you think a decision moved forward? What would, because that is a position that you're going to be put in a lot, right? And this is, if I had to argue, I would say that doing this for 10 years here, this is not unusual for how decisions are made in Atlanta. You hear community says, hey, hold up, you promised a thing. That could be a grocery store in downtown. That could be, access to healthy, affordable foods on the west side before a stadium is about to come. It could be the Beltline before that's happening, and it could also be the development of a training facility. I think it is. I think we want to turn this into a do we believe in training or not about the police. It has nothing to do with that, because it's not like police officers are not being trained right now. They're not just going untrained right now. Now, could there be better training? Could there be different training? Different conversation. I definitely want to get into that. But this is about civic participation and engagement. 16 hours of public comment. It's unprecedented. And then from there, for folks to say, look, every council member, every single person says this community engagement process has not been sufficient, yet 10 folks said, but we got to move forward anyway, because we just got to go. And this is what breaks, I think, that trust that you say is so important. So now we're here. People will say, and I'm not talking about 5, 10 people, thousands of people signed a petition to say, hey, council, we think you got it wrong, right? Now, those petitions were delivered in a box through a process that actually city council did not have. Petitions are put in, people say, we think you got this wrong, city council. We want to put this to a public vote. Do you think that, given that that's the case, do you believe it should go to a public vote, given that it is, we know that community engagement was insufficient, even by your standards, that it doesn't mean we won't have training facilities. Those exist right now anyway, so it's not a pro or anti-training facilities. But we're at a point where people are saying, I think you got it wrong and I want to bring it to a vote. Would you vote to put it on the ballot?
Yeah, I believe in processes.
Okay, me too.
Talked about, and I don't think this process is over, from what I understand. We're still
awaiting. It's going to be done in October or December, right?
And yeah, that is problematic, but the process is not over.
What does that mean? What do you mean when you say the process is done?
I think, aren't we waiting on a response from a judge for where someone has
So all that's going to do, the 11th Circuit, right, is when the process actually started, there was a question of who was allowed to go around to actually collect petitions.
Right.
Was it only residents of Atlanta, or could somebody who lives in DeKalb County, who lives around the facility, could they also collect petitions? Is that allowed? Judge said, well, the city of Atlanta didn't know. They didn't know the answer, so they went to a judge. The judge said, believe it should be permissible, absolutely, First Amendment right. And they restarted the clock on how long it would take you to get petitions. The day the petitions were actually submitted, the petitioners were hit with a legal document. Unnecessarily, I would argue, that says, we actually don't know whether we're gonna collect these signatures or not. They ended up actually taking the signatures in, but then an appeal was made to the 11th Circuit.
And all of that.
Yeah, so the question really becomes, if this is about a technicality, on whether you made it in a window or not, we can do technicalities all day long.
Right.
But the city council actually has the power to make that decision on their own, without a process, to be able to say, hey, we hear you, we see you, we actually believe if it is this contentious, let it go to a vote. If we believe it's actually gonna pass anyway, let it pass in the streets. If we don't believe it's gonna pass, then whatever it may be. Would you support an effort to put it on the ballot? Do you believe this should go to a referendum given all of the details that are provided here? Is there any?
Based on all the details that you are sharing with me today, yes. I'm getting that from you. And that's why I'm saying you have way more information on that than I do.
Okay.
And if I was sitting in that seat and I had all the information that I needed, I could make a decision about that. But I don't feel
I'm just trying to understand your line. Meaning, where is the line where you say, at the end of the day, this is where democracy needs to take over versus this is where representation needs to do what's in the best interest of my city?
Well, what I plan to do or lend my voice to is more clear processes, so that we're not in this space again. And so that's where I think some of the angst happened, the mix-up has happened. It feels like a goalpost has been moved in the middle of a game. And
by whom?
It feels like to many that it's been moved by the city or by council or by the foundation or by however you say it. And so if there was more transparency around it and more conversation around it, I probably would have more information. I get my information from you, I get my information from whomever I call. And I prefer to have documents in front of me so that I can read and just see for myself. I would never hide behind a decision that I make, so I'm not trying to say that. But I just don't feel that I have all of the information. But processes mean the world to me, and I think we should stick to them. Now, when we get into a legal situation where there's an appeal, and then there's a counter appeal, and all of that, I do see where at times you have legal takes over, and until things are settled. But up until that point, our processes need to be very, very, very clear.
What do you believe accountability should look like when process is broken? If there is a process and it is not followed appropriately or it is broken, what is the proper recourse for residents or for people to say, hey, I think you got it wrong and I want to hold you accountable for that? You talked about the fact that
accountability is love.
you said accountability is love. So how do I hold a city accountable?
That's a very good question. I think that legal process is what started,
What if the law department does not seem, because the law department at the end of the day works for the mayor and the council.
No, I'm just saying you can sue or you can appeal processes or things that happen.
Isn't it weird that people have to come together to sue their city, the city is spending millions of dollars on lawsuits against its residents?
Yes.
That's a little weird, right?
Yes, and so that is an avenue. You vote, and so you can vote.
That's every 4 years.
And that's every 4 years.
Okay.
That's fair. And then, there may be other processes that I don't know that you can hold people accountable. I don't know about.
Like referendum or ballot initiatives or.
Right, or starting a petition to remove someone. Accountability is as everywhere else. It has to be in
But how
government.
do we do it? Like, what do you, if I'm somebody who wants to know that I'm going to be able to hold you accountable to your word, the things that you're promising as you're campaigning, how should people hold you accountable? What are the mechanisms that you think, beyond, okay, wait 4 years if you can vote for me again, or not? What do you think the appropriate accountability measures are?
Yeah.
Especially for communities who already have lost trust.
Yeah. That's a very good question. I mean, I can only apply what I've known in the professional and the business world, right? There's an annual evaluation. There is some kind of way to measure your, when people are running, they do a truth, they look to see where the laws are. Yeah. I mean, maybe something like that, where people, this is what you started off saying, and this is where you are now. It's in every other industry. So I don't think it's absurd to have it in the political space. Some sort of maybe public facing,
like performance evaluation of council members.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah. You talked about your interest in kind of the pipelines that we've created, especially in a justice system that is unfair, almost turns you into a lawyer, right? So we have a jail right now in Atlanta that was used for many, many years, but it stayed relatively empty for a while. And so because it stayed empty for a while, under Mayor Bottoms, it was decided that we gotta shut down the jail. The jail is not something that we feel proud of having, or something that the city of Atlanta should be in the business in. She said something to the effect of, Atlanta's exiting the jail business, right? And we said we're gonna turn this facility into I think the John Lewis Center for Healing and Trust and Kumbaya, right? So that's what was supposed to be. And then, once again, city has promised something, residents have promised something, and then the Fulton County Jail, which is under the responsibility of the county, has been under investigation for 20 years. I mean, this isn't like new. This didn't just happen, oh my God, an emergency. There's been an emergency there for a long time. So they say, well, in order to deal with that emergency, we need more jail space. And we need more jails. They wanted to build a $2 billion jail, their own government shut them down for it. So then they come to the city and they say, you got a jail, I want your jail.
You got 700 beds.
Yeah, you got a little bit, you got some beds, like let me just get some of your beds, right? And advocates and activists said, wait a second, you don't need to do that. We just went through this, you cannot take over this jail. And yet, the city has still decided to lease over beds, even after it promised the public that it would not be in the jail business. Would you have voted to have extended that lease, or to extend that lease to Fulton County? And then I have a follow-up for that.
That is a very good question. Obviously, in Fulton County, there were horrific things happening. And to your point, they didn't just happen.
Yeah, it was documented for 20 years,
Yeah, and so I get the need for that reactive, being in that reactive space. But what I know in the business that I am in is prevention. And I think there are ways that we could utilize that space that was promised, or a space like that. I mean, we've looked at retrofitting it. We're talking maybe $40 million for that space alone, in a partnership with Fulton County to repurpose that space, I think is a better use of the space. Isn't it a betrayal
of the promise we made to the public?
It definitely feels that way.
But how is it not?
This is how I believe what happens. People make the best decision with the information that they have at the moment, right? And I think maybe some in the wake of the horrific conditions felt that this urgent need is a new perspective to them. Like we said, it's been going on for 20 years, but people started talking about it, things started happening, it was magnified, and so then there was a shift. I don't believe that that is the best use of that space. If given the opportunity to have a voice in it moving forward, I would agree that we need to repurpose it. I don't know if it's going to work for everything.
But would you lease jail beds to Fulton County?
No, not currently.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the next part of the conversation that just happened recently is the idea that we actually may just transfer the entire jail to Fulton County, in the sense of that John Lewis moment has to wait a little bit. That maybe
I had not heard that. I did hear that.
recommendations that were published.
Okay, yeah, okay.
So for you, you would not put the city in the jailing business?
No.
Okay. So I want to talk about, I've got a couple more things that we'll ask, get questions from the audience. So I want to talk about budget. So one of the major roles in being a part of the city council is to pass the budget. And it is a budget that has a multitude of things to it. You've got your water budget, you've got the airport budget, but the general fund itself, multi-$100 million budget. About 34% of it or so goes toward policing. Do you believe that that number is exactly where it would need to be, so you would renew it where it is? Do you believe it's too low and we need to actually be investing more? Or do you believe that it is too high and that we need to be investing less in direct policing, not any alternative programs or anything, but in direct policing today?
Yeah, I would think that the budget stays where it is.
Okay.
I do believe that we do need to do some preventive type things. I think there are other ways to get it out of the budget. I think.
What's a preventative thing that you, because you said you're someone who believes truly in prevention. So what's a specific preventative intervention that you believe the city of Atlanta must be investing in?
I think we need to invest in early child care for 3 and 4 year olds.
Okay.
I think we need to invest in after school care. I think there is a lot of time after school, 3 to 7, that our kids are, they need guidance, they need job training, they need access and exposure and mentorship. We can provide that in our rec centers. We can figure out, I'm interested in starting or introducing a referendum around an Apprentice Atlanta program where we work with businesses, nonprofits, we work with schools, the city to create just an apprenticeship program so that kids can learn how to do everything that the city needs employment or employees for, we need to provide that as a city. So whether that's HVAC, any position at the airport, any position at Microsoft, any position at the city council level.
So no question that there needs to be workforce development. We have a Department of Workforce Development. We have all of these different pieces.
Right.
But what I'm very curious about is when we're talking specifically about policing.
Yeah.
And you say we need to invest in alternatives.
Yes.
What other alternatives that are direct, like policing alternatives, do you believe we need to be investing in, and where should the money for these things come from?
I think we need to look at our budget more closely. Like you said, it's $870 million budget, right? That goes to general funds, like general budget. And so I think we can look in it and try to find more funds. We have what is called, I guess, sometimes rainy day funds, where we have overages or surplus. I think we can look at creating some revenue streams within that budget that are set aside to help with prevention. I mean, things like PAD, the 311 process.
So let's talk about PAD and 311. So PAD and 311 are, you would argue, are successful programs. They do a good job.
I would argue that the intention is good. They probably need more money.
Okay, great. Yeah, I agree. So they need more money. Where's that money come from?
Again, I think we need to be more creative in our budget and look to see where, and see where we can get some funds from.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
I'm curious, wouldn't the most natural place for policing alternatives were to fund that, wouldn't that be the police budget?
Yes, it could be. I think that we're in a position now where a lot of people in Atlanta don't feel safe, and
Sure.
and so
Does that mean more policing?
No, the knee-jerk reaction is the more policing, or to keep the budget. Well, for me, keep the budget where it is. For some, they might want to even increase it.
Okay.
But I think we need to look where there is money to move, that we do that. And, and I think, there's a way for the city to get more revenue. One of the things I've learned recently is the tax assessor's office, when it comes to commercial real estate, has been assessing much of the commercial real estate at about 50% of its value. So there's a way that we can probably get some more revenue, right? Like I said, the budget and the surplus of the budget, I know we won't always have that. We have that because of COVID, and we didn't have to use some funds. But if we're looking at prevention and long-term, we gotta start somewhere.
Yeah.
We gotta start somewhere. And I never want to raise taxes for the city of Atlanta, but I want to be creative about the people who come into our city every day. I don't know if that's parking tax. I don't know what that looks like, but we can figure out a way. I know I mentioned in a recent forum that, at one point there was a toll that came from, North Georgia, or northern Atlanta suburbs into the city. And I know that is a state mandated thing. I also know that, there's some parameters around it needing to be a new freeway. You can't put it on an existing freeway. But I am open to any conversation that allows us to get more revenue, and I think we need to talk about that a little further so that we can do all these things that we know will result in a lower budget because we will need less in that area. But we've gotten to a place where we are fixing gaps and closing gaps. And so it's going to be hard to change that mindset, but we got to start somewhere. And so I think that some of those programs that I mentioned are a way for us to prevent the things that we're seeing today.
So as someone who's worked mostly in education, why city council? Why not school board, right? There's a school board race next year. What do you think specifically equips you for this race, where someone would say your experience and your background may be better fit for a much larger budgeted and the types of examples that you even provided, early childhood education as a potential option. We talked about inside of the schools, what we could or couldn't do.
Talked about after-school programming.
Yeah, after-school programming. There's a lot of question on whose budget that should come from, right? Like whether that should come from the school budget or whether that should be a city budget. So what specifically do you think equips you to be the best suited person for a city council seat right now, as opposed to some other position or seat?
Yeah, because I've seen it from the inside, and a good education is the basis or the basic that we should provide for our citizens, right?
Yeah.
But what I've found is you gotta eliminate those barriers to education. And that involves strengthening and stabilizing families. And that is the role of the city and city government and Fulton and county government.
Yeah.
And so, yes, you can do all you can do between 8 and 2:30, but there are so many boundaries to just even getting to school. A sidewalk. I remember there were times when I was out front and right as the bell rang, several parents rolled up all together. And I'm like, hey, you guys didn't all leave at the same time. Dr. Jones, the lights on Hosea are not synchronized. Yeah. So I called my city council person for that school. I went to the NPU meetings. And so what I realized is it takes all of it. The teachers spend a lot of their time teaching, but they spend a significant time doing other things too. Yeah. That is the role of the city.
Got it. And so what would you do that would kind of release that burden? Is it a relationship with APS? Is it completely separate? Like what specifically legislatively, where's your number one priority as a future legislator?
Yeah, so my number one priority as a city council person is to address transportation, equitable transportation. Okay. That is a big barrier to kids getting to school, to parents getting to work. Even when you look at the way the city bus system is designed now, if you live within a mile radius, sometimes, that's your closest bus stop. And for many people, that makes sense. But you haven't seen for 30 years how moms come with a stroller, a baby, a diaper bag, because they're gonna drop them off at daycare. They have a work bag to go to work, and a mile seems like 10 miles. But if you don't see that, it just kind of makes sense to you.
Yeah.
And so that's the piece, the common sense piece of 30 years living here, being that person. You know, I have 3 children of my own. They're older now, but I took them to the schools where I worked because I wanted to show that I am vested here.
What's the difference between the role that the city would have in doing something like that versus MARTA?
Well, we work with MARTA. It's an official entity of MARTA, right? But we have to put the pressure on MARTA to do the right thing because we're responsible to the citizens. And if we have a report card, we might even do it more often.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of conversations, and I'm a bridge builder. I am someone who has the relationships, the temperament, the interpersonal skills. I have that, and I will go across the aisle, if you will, to talk about how can Georgia, the Department of Transportation, how can we all work together to solve this? I understand that at the federal level, here recently, $500 billion has been allocated for municipalities to build more affordable housing. We have to hear these things. We have to be a part of this conversation because there are multiple ways to address the crises that we're having here. So I think the relationships outside of Atlanta and within Atlanta are important, but also that ear to the ground, and I know how it works. I know how quickly it can destroy really good intentions. And so that's what I would push. How do you know that?
Yeah.
What's your basis on that? Would you talk to 1 or 2 people? That's how things happen in education.
Yeah.
Nobody's this. Nobody believes that? Who is nobody? We will get it down, it's like 1 or 2.
Yeah, there are people who believe Drake won that battle. So there are people who believe crazy things.
Right.
Yeah.
So I would just push people or my colleagues and myself to be open to go see what is really happening and not listen to 1 or 2 loud voices. And they may be well-meaning, but it doesn't bring the entirety of the neighborhood, what their priorities are.
Last question for you, and then we'll open it up, is around the relationship that you will have with folks who are in the existing current government, right? So we've talked to your 1 of 4 candidates that we've talked to. Mm-hmm. We have folks who have had adversarial relationships with people on council, but honestly have pushed them to do better things. That was to one candidate that they're able to get information that sometimes no one else can get, right? There's other folks who have pushed them to consider other policies and legislation. You have someone else who's worked directly with people who sit on council. What are your personal and professional relationships with this city government, and how do you think that would affect your ability to govern in the way that people would want, which would be, there's always fear if there's an existing relationship with folks that you wouldn't be able to be fully transparent or be fully, fully neutralize what may be a bias that comes in. Yeah. For you, what is your existing relationship with both the city council and this administration, and how, if at all, would that impact your ability to govern?
Yeah, so I have a unique existence of getting along with a lot of people, right? It doesn't mean that we agree on everything. So I do have existing relationships with a lot of people in the city. Like I said, I've been here 57 years. I've been working for 30 years within the system. So I think that works to an advantage in terms of, people respect my opinion. People will listen when I have something to share. People also know that I'm fair. They also know that I am impartial. I'm extremely neutral. One of the degrees that I actually have is in counseling and human growth and development. And so a part of that is just really listening, repeating what I've heard, then synthesizing the information, and then making a critical decision and sharing why I made that decision. So I don't always agree with everyone that is a friend of mine or is an acquaintance of mine. That's been literally for the last 30 years, because I'm the only one in my friend group, mostly, for the large part, that is in this education space, right? And so whenever I sit down, they're like, you're gonna let us have it. I know you're gonna tell us. So we're gonna give you 15 minutes, and then they donate. Like I've had a friends of this, every school I've worked at, I've had a friends of this or supporters of that, to sort of offset costs. So that's—
You've raised some of the most money at this point, right? It was 109,000,
yes,
something like that.
yes.
Are you concerned that there's any, are those all small dollar amounts? Are those, I mean, we saw some
Yeah.
$1,500,
Yeah.
and there were some larger amounts as well, some
Yeah.
companies that sponsored. How do you maintain the balance between someone who may donate and have an expectation of something in return versus
Yeah.
someone who's donating because they believe in you?
Yeah, I can literally say that 90% of my donors I personally know, and most of them for most of my life.
Got it.
And so these are people who are trusting, because I said something to one friend of mine, and he said, Nikki, this is saying that people trust you and they believe in you. And I don't take that lightly. I don't take the work that I did for 30 years lightly. As it goes the school, goes the neighborhood. And because I entered education as a counselor and wasn't a teacher, my lens has always been the supports around it. How can I eliminate any barrier so only a teacher can teach? And when I tell you those barriers are multiple, it's based on where you live, there's redlining, there's districts that were written basically with Jim Crow laws, when they did the zoning. There's so many things, how much a person makes on the dollar versus how much another individual makes in the same job on the dollar, your education, your background. It was always important to me that, you know, there's research that says poor teachers back to back can seal a kid's fate. So the urgency around the decisions that I make is really important. We can't get this right. We've let this community down. I wasn't a part of it, but I know it happened. I need you to really think about this, because and I also want you to think about, if we backtrack on this, what's that going to look like, and how are we going to set this up for if that happens. These are the unknowns. You can say that. These are the unknowns.
Yeah.
But what we know today, this looks like the best option. I think about all the tax breaks and things that have come up with developers, and I think that community-based agreement, you know, people feel like, okay, this is what I'm going to get out of it, and then that doesn't happen, so it breaks trust. I think the city should be involved in that piece. I think that way legal gets involved in that piece, so there's some teeth behind those.
Do you believe CBAs should be enforceable?
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Gotcha.
I do. You build trust on that. And so we need to put our money where our mouth is, because
Yeah.
these are our people.
Yeah.
This is us.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not our people. This is us.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, this is us.
Cool. All right, let me get some questions from the audience. Anyone in here? Otherwise, we'll get some online as well. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you believe that Atlanta should follow through on its promise to build the Beltline Rail around the entire city?
I believe that we need to complete the Beltline. I think there are some transportation projects that we have fallen short on. We have not fulfilled promises. And I know that Beltline Rail is one of those. I also know there's a large, part of the city that's not even connected to the Beltline yet. I know there's Cascade Road that you can't even go down the street, and it's been like that for 2 years. I grew up in Southwest Atlanta, so I also know that sidewalks are not connecting every neighborhood. I think that is a concern for me with this administration, the emphasis on transportation. That is the key. Getting to where you need to be for work, to meet with your family, to get health care, all of that, when that is not accessible to everyone, that becomes a problem. So I think we need to complete the loop, and I think we need to look at all methods of transportation.
So for Beltline Rail specifically, do you think that we should, it sounds like, restart the tens of millions that we spent into studying the existing light rail, or is that what I'm hearing, or?
No, I'm saying we need to complete the Beltline first, and then we need to look at adding rail.
Okay, so it's ready to build next year, and it's going to be done paving the path by 2026.
The rest of the Beltline, or just, okay. Well, if that is the case, then that's when we can, I want equitable.
So you think we should start building the rail next year? Even the 20?
I think as soon as we have the rail completed for everyone, which is also something we promised, we wouldn't leave out neighborhoods that don't have a voice because they could be working into the wee hours, and maybe cannot organize as well. I think for me, and I hope to be one seat on council, but for me, I want to look at all of the promises that we made and make equitable decisions. I have no issue with Beltline Rail. BRT, Campbellton Road corridor, Summer Hill corridor, even the Cliftondale corridor, if this is what we promised and this is what we know works, we need to figure out all the avenues and funding sources to get it done for everyone.
Any questions? Yes.
Sean Zialko, reporter with Capital B Atlanta. We are a digital news nonprofit that sends Black voices in our coverage. One of the main issues that Atlanta has faced, obviously, in the last several years is affordable housing or lack thereof. There have been calls and some legislation introduced at the Georgia General Assembly to repeal the statewide ban on rent regulation. State Senator Gonzalo James, at the behest of local housing advocates, has sought to do this in the last 2 legislative sessions. The activists, including Margie McLeod, who works, she's always at City Council, giving everybody a piece of her mind. They have been voicing this concern for a couple of years now and urging the City Council to do the same. Lawmakers have said City Council members have said that they don't have the ability to put this up for a vote because of the state law. Question is, would you support and advocate for repealing the statewide ban on rent regulation if you're elected? Why or why not?
Yeah, standing here with what I know and what you shared, absolutely I would support that. It is something that is determined, obviously by the state at this point. But what we have done and what we're able to do is set up funds through Invest Atlanta for rent assistance and things like that. So I think we can do more in that space. But we've got to address what's causing high rent, right? A lot of it is, land. A lot of it is security. They're paying for security because crime is what it is. And we know, I believe, security and policing is neighborhood-based too, right? You can be in the West End. You can also be in Petersburg. Why am I drawing a blank? I worked over
Pittsburgh,
there.
Peoplestown.
Not Peoplestown. What's the neighborhood I'm looking for? Anyway, it'll come to me. But they're less than like a mile or so apart, right? But violent crime is the issue in that neighborhood, and the next neighborhood, it is break-ins and things like that. And every crime is personal, right? You're in my space. You invaded my space, and I feel that way. So there's certain things that are preventative that could help all of our apartment owners and commercial people hopefully cut costs. And then they would also be a part of that, lowering that rent. I think we can all work together. There's more than one way to address these issues. And we think you legislate everything. But sometimes we can address it by just giving a lot more information to the entities and how it's impacting the people, our residents.
Yes, and along the same lines, speaking of ways to address that, one of the other contentious issues happening in council right now, and has been for the last couple of years, is rezoning. There are many folks who basically, at the city, that basically say, we have to rezone parts of Atlanta in order to account for more density. We've seen this, particularly in Midtown and downtown areas. Whereas folks who live in the residential parts of the city, including Grove Park and others on the southwest side, say, this is a city of single-family homes. We want to promote home ownership. We want to promote Black home ownership. And we don't necessarily want to build high-rises like you would see in New York or Chicago or Los Angeles. Where do you stand on rezoning? Do you support more rezoning to increase density, or do you support keeping the single-family culture, single-family home culture of Atlanta, and why?
Yeah, I support the rezoning to include multi-family housing, right? I support that, duplexes, triplexes, townhouses. I live in a townhouse. My parents in Southwest Atlanta, like I mentioned, they've been in their home for over 60 years. They are concerned because that's all they know. Well, I won't say that, because I remember growing up, walking up to a duplex. At one point, there were duplexes in the city. But with that said, I think it is a neighborhood decision. I don't think we spend our time and money pushing something on people, something that people don't necessarily want. I think we circle back to them. And I'll give you, going back to my parents, the neighborhood that I live in West Midtown, is single-family homes and townhouses. My mother comes over, she loves it. I'm like, but you're one of those not in my backyard kind of people. She's like, well, how do you know? Like, people don't know. People are used to what they're used to. That's taking it to communities, having conversations, having renderings and drawings, having conversations, getting that community-based agreement signed and with teeth. And I think I have to believe that most people are inherently good, and when you explain to them the reason why behind it, they will get behind it. But they gotta trust the person who's explaining it. So even if we bring all the developers and all of that, I have to be there with the district council person, and hopefully we've got that goodwill that we built, and but then hold us accountable, if we fall through. Like I said, in every other industry in the last 30 years, that's happened for me. I don't think this should be any different.
Yeah, this question is from a community member asked me to make sure this is asked to all the candidates. So we've spoke about policing alternatives and diversions. We've spoken about 311. This question is around community-based violence intervention, which is distinct from community policing. And so they wanted me to ask, what do you think the role of community-based violence intervention is in public safety within the city of Atlanta? And then who are some of the people or organizations that you look to or would like to look to as leaders in the community-based violence intervention space?
That's a very good question. I do believe in it. I do. An ounce of prevention is worth, a pound of all the stuff that we're kind of doing now. Who would partner in that? Like I said, I am pushing rec centers and also libraries. I think Fulton County could get them on board. It's a public health thing, and health is a part of Fulton, the county's responsibilities. And I think about how I grew up, right? Officer Friendly came to the school. We had the fire truck to stop, drop, and roll. So there was a trust that was built. We knew that was a safe space. If something happened in the neighborhood, you could go to the fire department. Or firehouse, I guess they were at the time. And so I do feel that that's a role. I think that we need nonprofits and for-profits to help with that. Because a safer city means that their employees are happier. They come to work, they live in the city. We need our employees to live in the city. They keep, as it stands now, they take money from, but they don't reinvest it back into the city. That's a problem for us. We've got to solve for that. But we got to make it safe. We got to make it comfortable for them. We got to make workforce housing and front line housing a priority. Because the other piece to that is when you see the teachers and firefighters and policemen out in the community, and you see the police car in the neighborhood, it curbs negative behavior. There's research that says that for sure. But then also, it is something that happens, and we see it all the time. A kid may have a lot of respect for the coach or the teacher or someone they run into in the neighborhood, and that just doesn't happen. And then also, if you're leaving the neighborhood, you're leaving the city of Atlanta, you're not vested really in what happens. 5 o'clock, you're like deuces, and I'm out, and you watch it on the news. And you probably highlight it when it hits the news. Can you believe this is happening? But you get in your car and you come back. And so we've got to get people to be more invested, and it's got to be preventative. It's got to include, it's got to be in the neighborhoods where they are so people can walk. And so that's why I think a partnership with nonprofits, for-profits, and then also the rec centers, and then Fulton County. And all of the stuff that I'm talking about, I've literally done in the level where I am. I helped to write for a wellness center, a wraparound center in my last school where I was. It was the first in a middle school in the state of Georgia. And so kids get haircuts. You would not believe that kids don't want to go to school because their line is not right, you know, or their edges are not laid. Any barrier to get them in that classroom and staying, I will do it. Any barrier that keeps Atlantans from paying more taxes and makes our city safer and provides work and hope for our kids and our young adults, I will make that happen.
So a lot of the officer-friendly and a lot of the at-promise centers are run by the police department. So community-based violence intervention involves a lot of like street outreach, hospital-based violence intervention programs. You spoke a little bit about some nonprofits. Can you share some more about the specific actions in programs you would like to see those organizations or individuals outside of police do for public safety in the city?
Yeah, so I would need to do more research on, you know, specifically what you're talking about, but it makes, I mean, it is in line with what I'm talking about, taking it to people, right? And building those relationships and having those conversations. It sounds like I don't know enough about it, but it sounds perfect and I would support it. I would just need to know more about it and how to get it done. And you don't pilot it, you know, I'm not saying it goes in every neighborhood in the city. We figure out where's a good fit to pilot and see how it works, because everything that works somewhere else doesn't work here. But that is exactly what I think. I think prevention, like I've said that from my day one. The thing that's always resonated with me is how do we prevent things? You know, again, most of my experience, and I'm a small business owner here in the city, you know, so I had to find a lease, parking, all of those things, you know, I had to get with my startup. There's so many things I had to navigate, but a lot of my experience here, or my examples here will be education-based, but you have to have these systems in place and be open to trying new things, and I've done that, and that is something that I would obviously continue to do.
Right on. Thank you.
Anything else that came online?
That's it.
Okay, cool. So last thing for you.
Yes.
So I wanted to say, you know, thank you for being a part of this conversation. You know, I'm also the kid of an educator and come from educators, so I know that like the sacrifice that goes into that, and appreciate that. And I know every candidate who's coming to this is making a lot of personal sacrifice to be here. It would be great for us to know how we can learn more about your campaign and learn more about your work. People have an opportunity to see you on stage again in October for a forum, but in the interim, how can people learn a little bit more about you and your work?
Yeah, so I do have a website, NicoleEvansJonesForAtlanta.com. You can do there. You can send me an email. We reply to every email that we receive. It might take us a little bit of time, but we do reply. But yeah, I want to hear everybody's voice. I don't think I have all the answers. You know, we had this conversation going into education and not being a teacher. My dissertation was on teacher retention though, because I know the importance of it. So I had to listen and hear where to prioritize, as we're talking about. And I get a budget too, or I got a budget too. Principals are CEOs of the medium-sized companies. $7.5 million budgets. When I was doing it, about $10 million budgets in the elementary schools now, over 100 employees. That's a medium-sized business. So with that said, we have to listen, prioritize the budget, and that's what I plan to do in this role. So anyone who reaches out, any feedback, that's why I have my pad here, because I want to take down stuff. I don't have all the answers, but I do have the disposition to get this work done. Because I don't feel like I have all the answers, I'm not gonna sit here and tell you what needs to be done. We're gonna work together to figure out what needs to be done and what is feasible for everybody. Yeah.
Okay. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
For those of you who are watching, you can check out the full recording of this on YouTube. We'll also be posting everything soon to voteatl.org. This election is this November, so you will be voting on this seat this November. If none of the candidates receive 50% of the vote, it will go to a runoff, but we will keep you posted if that's the case. But we hope you'll stay engaged. If there's anything you do after you watch this or after you watch the little part of this, go tell 5 people about this election and let them know that Atlanta is on the ballot as well. So thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.